Hello, it's Stacey Holt from Real Estate Excellence. Thank you for joining me for this short video. Today is the 10th of August 2023. There's so much going on, and this is a video for Queensland licensees, property managers, but particularly Real Estate Excellence members. Yesterday, we sent an email out to our free industry mailing list. We have two lists, one for our valued members and one for industry, which is free for all. It's our industry. Obviously, I give a lot where I can. Now, I said in part in the email yesterday that we'd be forgiven for at times feeling a bit confused and overwhelmed. There's so much going on in the policy and legislation and media, and it has been for quite some time. We all know the terrible crisis that many are in, and when we say many, we're not just talking about poor people who are having trouble finding housing, which is dreadful, and particularly homeless this week. And I know how hard it is for you, and at the front line, and you're dealing with great people who just don't have either housing or affordability. And when we talk about affordability, we're dealing with investors who are doing it tough, increased costs. I know myself personally, and basically, you know, it's not about them and us and lessors and tenants, it's about people. And you know that. But what's happening is so much. So in very short brief, and I'll lead you to where more information is if you wish, but I know through membership we're getting increased inquiry from wonderful PMs who have got clients who are seeing, reading on socials, media, you know, newspapers, news, whatever, all this rent freeze and so much more. So at realestateexcellence.com.au, I've got a link there on the homepage called RTRA at Review. And what I'm about to brief is to the best of my ability, all put in one spot at the top of the page. Now that blog's been running for 11 years and I've always kept it up to date. And what I'm going to talk to you about now is right there. Any troubles, please just email us if you have any trouble finding the link. So basically we've got... at the moment, the rent freeze at a national level from the Greens Party. Now, the Greens Party at the Queensland state level, but also particularly federal since the last state election, have been calling for a rent freeze. We know that the months just gone by, federal parliament failed to pass the housing funding bill, and basically due to the Greens blocking because they want to negotiate in relation to rent freeze and other. Now, the federal parliament under our Labor government in Australia, as our federal government, we know have just introduced the housing funding bill again. Next week, National Cabinet meet. Now, National Cabinet began during COVID, and basically it's a leadership meeting of all the state and territory leaders, the premiers and chief ministers with the Prime Minister, where they speak about, obviously, issues relating to the country. We know tenancy law is state and territory based. Queensland, the RTRA Act. Now, in the last 24, 48 hours cycle, but it's been going for quite some time, but particularly in the recent cycle of media and news, there's a lot of information out there in relation to the National Cabinet meeting due next week, I believe, in Brisbane. And apparently part of the agenda is the housing and the rent freeze and the crisis that we're dealing with. Now, I must just stress, it's a Greens policy, and they're sort of, in a way, what's the word, ransom, holding the federal government to ransom, I don't know, whatever the right word is there, but they're blocking the bill, so to speak, or have done, in relation to wanting more done. So we know that it has to be done at state and territory levels, hence National Cabinet meeting, and again, in the media cycle now, it's on the agenda. Now, what's important to know is most Australian state and territories have Labor governments, and we have a Labor federal government. Now, my comments are not meant to be political and inappropriate because that's inappropriate, but it's important to understand policies and Labor government policies. For example, in Queensland, we know that Queenslander, we voted Anastasia Palaszczuk as a democracy in October 2020 for a record third-year term for 4 years. Now, we've got a majority Labor government in Queensland. Now, that was the first year of COVID, 2020, need I remind you? And we know that that was the last state election. The next one's October 24, and there's a majority Labor government. So when you talk about democracy and policy and legislation and stuff, you've got a majority government. If Labor wants something, they're probably more than likely going to get it. And when it comes to tenancy law, they pretty much have. In June 2021, stage 1 of the tenancy law went through Parliament. We know it commenced October 22. So stage 1 of tenancy law, pause. We knew in November 2019 what Labor government policy was, and after the world's biggest review in 2018, etc., looking back for a moment, we knew what Labor government policy pretty much looked like. Again, COVID began March 2020, election October 2020, and we've got a majority Labor government. Hence, stage 1 tenancy law under the housing legislation went through Parliament as a Labor bill, and obviously it all passed, being a majority democracy vote in the House. We know that minimum housing standards are part of stage 1. They commence in coming days, weeks actually, 1 September 2023. So they're part of stage 1, and they commence 1 September 2023. Members, we're an email away for any support on that or other later. Now, stage 2, we just had a consultation period. It ended May. Again, all at my website under the RTRA app blog. Now, stage 2 consultation ended in May, and in due course, we're going to see shortly, obviously, a bill or more information. During my upcoming Property Management Excellence, my next PME half-day events throughout Queensland, Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, Rockhampton, Gladstone, Bundaberg, Sunshine Coast, Ipswich, Toowoomba, Brisbane, Gold Coast, realestateexcellence.com.au under training events. I'll be discussing what I'm discussing now and more, okay? And also there's more content on the session, but you'll see that at my website later or email us. So basically what I want to talk to you about is stage 2, we're waiting on more news. Labor and government until October 24. We know their policy. They've got time. The world won't end. We'll move forward and deal with what we have for now. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you about is the rent increase frequency laws. We know that so unusually, I just can't stress how bad, unusually, but 18th of April 2023, our Deputy Premier, Dr. Stephen Miles, put through in a most bizarre way an amendment to the RTRA Act. A bit of a knee-jerk reaction in my view, but I won't get too much into my opinion. But they amended the RTRA Act, which began, we know, July 1, about rent increase frequency laws. And we know from July 1, it's retrospective, that we can't increase rent in a 12-month period for our investors if it's the same tenant. 12th of July, some days after commencement, the government called a review and consultation because they never consulted on the earlier one, hence unintended consequences. And the reason they're consulting, I don't personally agree with, is they believe that lessors are underhandedly making tenancy leases contracts shorter to increase rent with new tenants. So what they're looking at is changing the law to make the 12-month relate to the property and not a tenancy. And importantly, 11th of August, tomorrow, 2023, is our final day to have our say about the consulting period for rent increase law changes again. And again, this is the first time we're being consulted as an industry. So you, me, your investors, it's their law. Make sure they know and have a chance to have their say, tenant advocates and anyone with a vested interest or an interest in our great industry. So 11th of August 2023 is the last day to have our say about the consultation period for rent increase changes relating to property, not tenancy. So realestateexcellence.com.au, the RTRA Act Review tab, you'll see I've done my best at the top of it to have pretty much everything there and then read through if you've got time or you make time if you wish. Now, the other thing, the National Cabinet meeting next week and this whole rent freeze thing, because it's, as I said, it's in the news cycle and has been for quite some time. I mean, Dr. Amy McMahon, the member for South Brisbane, introduced a bill to Queensland Parliament, a state amendment, last year or the year before, but so much has been happening. But in recent times, recent enough, to put a rent freeze in. Now, Greens have only got a couple of seats in the Queensland House, so it didn't go anywhere and ended up not going anywhere. So it's long been out there in our domain about this rent freeze stuff. So let's just see what happens next week with the National Cabinet and the meeting of all our state and territory leaders, again, majority Labor governments. I'm alert, not alarmed, but what will be, and we'll learn together what happens. And together we'll continue riding this wave. And I take my hat off to you. You do a wonderful job, property managers. And all you can do is the best you can, and the best you can to keep up to date as well. There's also a Senate inquiry into housing. There's a number of things you'll see on my website if you wish. Members, we're an email away and we'll keep you up to date as we always have, coming up to 14 years as Real Estate Excellence, and thank you for your valued business. Thank you for joining me. This is Stacey Holt from Real Estate Excellence, and bye for now.